Table for two, please.
Hello, and welcome back to Table for Two. For this week's episode, we wanted to cover Asian misrepresentation in media, especially Asians in Western media. The small amount of time we get is heavily stereotyped and misportrays Asians, which pushes harmful assumptions about our diverse group of people.
So, just to make this clear before we begin, I'm East Asian.
And I'm South Asian.
So, we will rely heavily on example from those two regional distinctions, as that is who we are best acquainted with.
If we say something wrong or you would want us to know about something that we may have done, please correct us by using the feedback form in our linktree. So, some background before we get in. What are Asians exactly? The term Asian is commonly defined as solely East Asia, specifically China, Korea, and Japan by Western societies.
But Asia is a vast continent that makes up over 50% of the world's population. For example, there are North, Central, East, West, South, Southeast, Southwest, and more that are more accurate depictions of different groups of Asians.
We also have one of the lowest amounts of representation in media. Everything that I've seen online and researched has...
It's been 1%, like a single-digit percentage. The time that we are presented in media, we're always stereotyped or are a depthless character or comedic relief or supporting side cast. For example, the usual Asian stereotype is like a nerdy kid who's good at math, you know?
Now, why is it important for Asians to be properly represented in media? Media has a massive influence over perception, and individual perception translates to societal perception.
By only portraying Asians in a stereotyped manner, this will further push the harmful notions that continue to misrepresent Asians today.
And I listened to a TED Talk called Asian Misrepresentation in Media by Peter Westacott, and this was a really great quote.
The media plays a role in maintaining systematic racism, whether they intend to or not. Hollywood producers influence our implicit biases by excluding Asians in media through processes such as whitewashing or yellowface, or by only casting them in very stereotypical roles.
And a great point that he makes is that the media doesn't necessarily make people racist, but it influences how we perceive and furthers harmful racist notions.
Yes. So what does representation do for people? So white representation versus Asian representation.
When white kids grow up, they have a plethora of people to relate to. They see other white characters on TV and can dream and aspire to become them. They have role models. They have thoughtfully written characters that they can relate to.
However, we don't have that. We don't have a lot of Asian characters that we can relate to, whether that's in TV shows, movies, books, famous figures, etc. We have depthless characters that fit stereotypes that our diverse group of people don't fit.
We have interests that surpass our stereotypes. We have passions and aspirations that are quote-unquote not the norm. And we also don't have people we can look up to in the same aspect because the same characters are shoved down our throat continuously.
As, an Asian American, and people say that you can just watch movies from East Asia, movies produced there, movies from South Asia, movies produced there, written there. But that doesn't encompass our experience as Asian Americans.
The experiences shown in Asian-made movies is vastly different from the American setting that Asian Americans grow up in.
Yeah. For example, we see so many models that are white, so white people feel like they have a chance in modeling, they are represented in modeling, and they see themselves reflected in those white people modeling. However, we don't see many Asian models, especially South and Southeast, and many people feel like that's a dream that is out of reach.
It's also hard growing up without representation because we feel like we don't belong in our space, or quote-unquote otherness. We feel isolated because we feel like we cannot relate to anyone. All the people online are living this very American or white lifestyle that we Asians or other Black, Indigenous, or people of color groups cannot relate to. An essential part of being in a community is relating, as it brings a sense of belonging, of comfort. And when we aren't given good representation, the feelings of loneliness, isolation, and abnormality is 10 times more extreme.
Not seeing myself represented in media, which I mean TV shows, movies, etc., it led to my view of beauty becoming people that were white, and I wanted to look and be like them as much as possible. And I didn't understand why my family didn't do things like these people. Why didn't we eat like them, you know? Why do we eat different foods? Why does our household work differently? And I feel like I can't relate and don't belong here in America because of that, but I'm also an outsider in my country of descent.
Mm-hmm. And I also think this is a feeling that a lot of immigrant or child of immigrants share, because it's hard. And especially in terms of the South Asian community in America, a lot of people here are so toxic, and it's really, really hard to find people that you actually enjoy being around and can share those same experiences and feelings with.
And we may discuss this on a further episode, but there is a very big shift between our parents and us as immigrants ourselves, or children of immigrants, like second generation.
So now we're going to move on and address some of the common stereotypes that are imposed on Asian Americans. And to start off, we're going to talk about tacky accents.
So these quote-unquote accents, they're often exaggerated to have more inflections and tones. So it's very, very, played for the drama. It's not accurate. And it mocks accent. It pushes the idea that someone is only deserving of respect when they can speak English well.
Mm-hmm. Next, white savior complexes. This is portrayed in so many movies, and it irritates me so much. The portrayal of poverty, which is a very common setting in these kinds of media, is romanticized, which is extremely problematic in and of itself, because poverty is nothing to be romanticizing. It is such a difficult experience that people have to go through, and it's too normalized. But to get back on topic, it's always this white man that waltzes in to this struggling community, and they save the day because only white people can incite change and make credit for people of color working hard to improve their lives. And there's all sorts of controversial and harmful notions that are pushed through white savior complex movies and just hard work type movies, but I won't dive into those at the moment.
A lot of times in especially movies, Asians are portrayed there as simply just comic relief. There's no depth to the character. They just come in, make a joke, and it's usually racist at that point. And Indiana Jones, that movie franchise, is a pretty big example of this.
Next, we have the mockery of complex names.
They shouldn't even be complex, honestly, you know?
Mm-hmm. They should be accurate names that are used by Asians. But
yeah. Names have to be constantly shortened or angelicized because people won't take the time to try and properly pronounce them. So there's often a misconception that I come across with people being unwilling to use ethnic names because they don't want to say it wrong. But for me, personally, I have a Chinese ethnic name. Some of the pronunciation is definitely difficult if you don't speak the language natively or as a first language. But honestly, as long as you try, I don't care if you get the pronunciation a bit wrong. Just have the time to, respect my name. Try, at least try, Don't just be like, oh, I'll just call you this. Don't give me a nickname. At least just try to pronounce it correctly.
And I know this is a pretty common feeling among Asian Americans, but personally, I'm an immigrant myself. Mm-hmm. I moved here when I was pretty young, so I guess not really, but I am.
Yeah.
But I used to be okay with people mispronouncing my name, like for example, my teachers or my coaches. I'd be fine if they said it wrong. But now I can't stand it. Mm-hmm. I have the time to go through and learn your name. I say it properly. I address you properly and respectfully. So I don't understand why you couldn't do the same for me. Once again, you can try. It's the effort that counts, not necessarily...
Yeah. You don't have to say it with, perfect pronunciation. As long as you, try to and, you're making effort to, then I'm already... That's,
You're doing so much better than
everybody else. A lot of times for Asian Americans that are second gen or onward, they'll pronounce their names or introduce their names in a way that's quote unquote easier for non-speakers of their language to say.
I've had a lot of experiences watching people that are Indian say their names really interestingly. And I don't know, like, our names were given hopefully with some kind of meaning, or even just given to us because they are a good representation of our culture, of our heritage. And a lot of people, when you mispronounce it or butcher it so much just so we can make it easier for other people to say, kind of just ruins your name. You should have enough respect for your name to be able to say it properly and to tell people to say it properly, because you have every right to have your name said properly just as anyone else. If I can say Albuquerque, you can say Viveka. If I can say Worcestershire, you can say Viveka.
Worcestershire.
Something like that.
Worcestershire.
I don't know.
The model minority myth is also something that plays a role in the casting, the portrayal, and representation of Asians in media.
For people who may not be familiar with this, the model minority myth is basically the implication that all Asians are super smart and are just naturally smart.
And just basically that Asians are the perfect, quote-unquote, minority that others minorities should look up to because of the way we act. But that's usually defined as being submissive, always quiet, these sorts of things. Because we do these things, or because we act this way, then we will be successful.
Mm-hmm. And this is obviously a generalization. It generalizes the entire Asian group of people who are all diverse and who do not conform to the quote-unquote model minority myth. And it basically invalidates our own strife and our own problems and our own struggles that we have had in Western countries.
Yeah, and that's why you see a lot of times Asian struggles, they have not been in the media ever until recently. And even then, we were a 3-minute broadcast. Our struggles were aired on a 3-minute broadcast. And then we were never talked about again. So the model minority myth, this pits people of color against each other, when really we should all be against white supremacy.
When we should all be supporting each other and supporting each other's fights for equality and equity.
Yeah. The model minority myth makes the struggles of Asians seem lesser, although we can never accurately compare struggles with other groups of marginalized people because we all go through different things and we will never be able to fully understand what it's like to live as that marginalized group, as that marginalized person,
And for our last common stereotype, we're going to talk about Asians being quote-unquote ugly all the time.
As for East Asians, a lot of times this is defined as, slanted or small eyes and like a flat face. Like I've seen a lot of jokes like, oh, how can you breathe? Your nose is so flat, something, And when people would do that, like Chinese, Japanese, something, and they'd pull back their eyes at different angles. People did that to me in kindergarten and like in elementary school. And I didn't know, like, what to make of it. Like, I knew it was wrong at that time, but I didn't know, like, what exactly. So I just kind of, like, stood there,
True, you were just a kid.
Yeah, I was just a kid.
And I also want to just say, to add on to Amy, that the specific eye shape that certain Southeast Asians are typically going to have is also spread out into the rest of Asia. It just depends on like the diaspora, complicated family histories, whatever, but it's also shown in a lot of things. Like a lot of Northeast South Asians, they have like slanted eyes. They have similar eye shapes as you guys do. They have like more fat around their eye area. When people call out like South Asians for Asian fishing, I'm like, bro, some of us have those features, okay? And obviously no excuse to people who do, but some of us do have those features. So you can't just call out our region and just like for no reason whatsoever. At least for South Asian people, we have a lot about colorism. I think colorism is very evident in a lot of Asia. There's a lot of whitening creams, there's a lot of ads for that, and typically it's all chemicals and they're like very, very dangerous for your skin.
Yeah, and people promote beauty as in having fair skin.
So that's typically what we get, and we're just called unhygienic and stuff, and I'm like, excuse me? There's so many harmful notions that are placed upon South Asians like that we smell, that we have facial hair, which is literally normal. And obviously we can get more into depth about all sorts of things like this, but we will save that for another episode. And another big thing is that ethnic features are only deemed pretty on white people. A lot of South Asians have big lips, we have thicker eyebrows, and we are a lot more darker. And this is only cool if a white person has the big lip fillers, if they have the fluffy soap brows, if they sit in tanning beds for 16 hours a day. It's only cool if they do it.
Mm-hmm. And when it's natural features, it's deemed as, ugly. And the same thing with the quote-unquote fox-eyed trend. A lot of people fail to realize how this is harmful. But like I mentioned, the Chinese-Japanese thing, and now it's a trend to have this eye shape. So why are my ethnic features, why are these an accessory? I can't take them off. I can't put it on like mascara. I can't put it on with eyeliner, and I can't draw it on like that. It's on me. It's my features. So why is it only pretty if somebody else does it? Why can't I be pretty in my own features? And when people fail to realize that this is harmful, and they're like, well, it's just an eye shape. But the thing is, you've been using this to mock Asian people for so long, and now it's a trend. Now it's like stopping sensitive.
And this same situation happens in so many different aspects in life for POCs. We've seen black hairstyles, and whenever white people start donning dreads or cornrows and black people start calling them out, they're just going to gaslight them and return them and be like, it's just a hairstyle.
But it's not just a hairstyle.
There's cultural significance behind those hairstyles, and white people can never understand that, nor can any other group except black people. So it's extremely rude to gaslight people of color. So now we're going to dive into the current representation we have now and how that representation is controversial. And I'm going to start off with South Asian representation, as I am a South Asian. I also want to preface this by saying that I will be switching between the whitewash pronunciation of the ethnic name and the actual pronunciation of the ethnic name, just out of habit. So we're going to start off with Baljit, or Baljit, from Phineas and Ferb. He's your stereotypical Indian accent nerdy brown boy. He's bullied by Buford, a big white boy. He's super good at academics and is so afraid of failing. He's passive, polite, and he's basically a pushover. This furthers the model minority myth, and especially as this was such a popular kids show at the time, and probably still is now, it continues to push this very harmful stereotype onto other South Asian kids. And therefore, a lot of people assume that Asians were naturally smart. Everyone has varying levels of intelligence, and for Asian kids who needed extra support to understand topics, weren't given any, as they were under the assumption that they were just naturally smart. This has happened to me in middle school when I was struggling as I moved to a new middle school. So the teacher wouldn't even give me a second thought when I was struggling with whatever I learned in 6th grade, and she would just ignore me, but she would give other white kids a lot of support whenever they had a question or whatever, and that really ticked me off the wrong way. Also, do your own research about the model minority myth. Learning for Justice has a great article about this, and we'll probably elaborate a little more as we go through. Next, we're going to talk about Ravi Gupta Balasubramanian Ross, or Ravi, from Jessie. And first of all, his name is quite literally a mockery of ethnic names. And also, the name is just wrong. The names are from different regions of India, so it wouldn't even make sense to have that in one single name. But once again, he's your stereotypical Indian accent, nerdy brown boy. He's fresh off the boat, even though you would assume that he would lose his accent a little from all of the years that he's lived in America. He's bad at sports. He's bullied and teased a lot and has no friends other than his pet, who is quote-unquote weird. His character describes India as this very barbaric jungle, and India is literally a modern country. We don't live in a jungle. We don't sleep in beds made out of nails. But this once again pushes the model minority myth while mocking South Asian, specifically Indian culture. Also, just Disney shows sucks. They create these very stereotypical, insensitive, shallow, and stupid shows like Jessie, and you can really see it through the characters of Jessie. And next, I want to dive into Devi from Never Have I Ever. She is a nerdy, not very popular brown girl. And the issue here is really in the writing of Devi. Mindy Kaling takes her material from her own experiences, which are severely outdated. The experience for South Asian teens specifically is much more different than it was 30 years ago. Also, Devi's very embarrassed of the fact that she's Indian. She hates an integral part of her identity. And what is that supposed to do for people watching, especially South Asians, who encounter this main character that hates herself? And the issue is her unappreciation and distaste for her culture is never worked through. And as a South Asian, I assume others relate to feeling somewhat embarrassed of their culture. But many, as have I, worked through that to become proud and unashamed of my culture. But Devi never does in season 1. And this is extremely disappointing, but hopefully we'll see something in season 2. And it's, once again, really, really hard to be critical and disappointed when we get a morsel of representation. I know this calls out a lot about the bad South Asian representation that we have, but sadly, I cannot really name a lot of good South Asian representation in characters. I'm also not a very big book person, so I don't even know from there. But my sister did say Cece from New Girl was a good example of South Asian representation. The show never really mocked South Asian culture. Whenever one of the characters would mock South Asian culture, Cece would always call them out and make sure that they understood the wrongness of their actions. And her identity as a South Asian was not all-encompassing. She had other things going on. She was her own individual, and one part of her identity was her South Asianness.
Harry Potter is a very, very well-known franchise that has one East Asian character, Cho Chang. So, the first issue here arises with her name. She's meant to be a Chinese character, yet her name is made out of Korean and Chinese surnames, and it doesn't even make sense in the naming context and format of Korean or Chinese names. It's such little effort in naming and understanding. Like, you can name a wizard Nymphadora Tonks, but you can't take the time to research and just look for a good name for the character and not give her a name the equivalent of, like, mocking the language. Her character is written in without any background, and she is literally just there for romantic drama. There's no depth to the character. She's merely there to progress Harry's story, which is a trope you see many East Asian characters fall into. Her talents in athletics are often written to be overshadowed by other characters. Like, Cho is good at Quidditch, but Harry's better. Cho suggested a way to get Harry into the Ravenclaw room, but Luna gets the credit for her idea, etc. Her character gets put aside after that book, so people are left with the imprint of an over-emotional and obedient character whose happiness comes from the boys she dates. And this caters to the submissive stereotype of East Asian woman in film. And like we mentioned in the beginning, like, do I think this is on purpose? It's not fully. But this is how East Asians, specifically East Asian women, have been portrayed in media for so long that it's become a norm for them to be written this way. I would also give examples of good East Asian representation in movies, but sadly, there's been a lot of white actors playing Asian roles. For example, Ghost in the Shell, The Good Earth, Aloha, Doctor Strange, etc. There are so many wonderfully talented Asian actors, so please allow them to represent on screen. One good movie I know is The Farewell, which is a great movie written and directed by East Asians themselves, and it illustrates cultural differences between Asian Americans and their families in Asia. And I definitely cried during this movie because on to a certain level I could relate with the story and how the main character feels.
On top of just characters, we obviously have celebrities that are just popular figures in Western media who have also not been the best representation. And we're going to go back to South Asian celebrities for now. Let's move on to Lily Singh. And when Lily Singh was starting out, she was very chill because she created relatable content for South Asian / brown people in general that didn't feel like a mockery of our people. But as she grew to fame on YouTube, she started profiting off of stereotyping South Asian people. She would do the strict parent scale all the time, and it was just exhausting and embarrassing watching these videos mocking people like me. She, as an influencer, is also somewhat problematic as she used Black culture as a stepping stone to fame, but we should always consume media critically, and we should never idolize influencers. Some of the good South Asian representation that I have seen is Hassan Minhaj and Tan France. Although they both have their own flaws, shortcomings, and scandals, I'm not trying to idolize them, but their content and message hits right most of the time.
As for East Asians on YouTube and in the influencing scene, I have seen so many quote-unquote comedy channels use the same stupid East Asian stereotypes and just Asian stereotypes made by non-Asian people and reuse the same stupid skits about tiger parents with exaggerated accents and etc. And it's infuriating because I know that my parents, my grandparents, and elders in general, they deserve so much more respect than this. They shouldn't be reduced to one-dimensional people disconnected from the world. And, joking stereotypes made by Asians themselves, they're alright, they're great. But not the ones made by non-Asian people. Those are usually degrading and they are harmful. MXM Toon has been a pretty great East Asian representation and role model in the music industry. She makes great music, and I usually agree with her message. So as for our final takeaways after all of this discussion, we need inclusion, we need representation, and we need growth.
The representation of Asians should be accurate and told from an actual Asian from the same background, and it should not continue to further harmful stereotypes.
The representation should connect Asians to their heritage, to their identity, and make them feel a sense of belonging. The media is moving along slowly, but we need to make sure we are going in the correct direction with accurate representation and promising change. We know this was a very hefty episode with a lot of information. We hope you guys as listeners will be able to think about the messages that we've said in here. Please also give us feedback on your point of view and if there's anything that we should be corrected on.
And also remember to consume critically and do your own research from trustworthy sources because you should never take your information from one sole source.
Please look forward to our episode next week in which we will be talking about our experiences at airports.
See you then. I'm Viveka.
And I'm Amy.
And we're
Signing off.
Check, please.
You can find our episode credits, contact/feedback forms, socials, and YouTube channel all at linktree.com/table-for-two-pod, which you can find in our episode and Spotify bio. See you next Wednesday with a brand new episode.